We've talked about two institutions so far, the family and religion. I chose the family first because it's the first unit of socialization, and so much of our culture gets transmitted by family. We also get our socioeconomic status from our family, at least until the young adults become an income earner in their own right. And religion was important to look at, I thought, because so many of the basic assumptions about sexuality were framed for thousands of years by religion. And remember, too, that religion was a very strong organizing principle of society for thousands of years. It was the manner in which social control was done, and has also been heavily entangled with the state. Now we'll be looking at the media, and I think the media is another institution that has a strong bearing on human sexuality. And that's because the media is everywhere. You have to wonder how many minutes, or for that matter seconds, you can go without media bombardment. I think to get away from all the messages we're sent by the media, you have to make a conscious effort to unplug and to get away from general society, because the media has this uncanny ability to creep in almost any place we go. Think about all the message we get, and constantly. So to that extent, the media might be thought of as the single most influential socializing agent. It's hard to get away from, and the messages tend to reinforce the status quo, though some messages are opting for some degree of social change. At least for the purpose of advertising, and that's, remember, where there are plenty of resources for developing messages to get you to buy a certain product. The status quo tends to get reinforced. The media is referring to a broad range of mediums: TV, movies, radio, music, magazines, tabloids, and of course, the internet. Children fall heavily under its influence. And remember, children are young adults in the making. The adults' values and norms to a very large degree are going to be molded during the childhood years. So the messages, ideas, and values that a child is exposed to will be hard to dismantle or deconstruct as an adult. So the activities the child does, to some degree, forms our future generations. And we know that the average child spends anywhere from 6 to 8 hours a day watching, listening to, or reading some form of the media. Simply put, sex sells. We see it as a central point in some magazines that are not considered pornographic. Magazines like Maxim and Cosmopolitan. They sell sex, but they're not necessarily porn. And these two magazines, Maxim and Cosmopolitan, they're in the top 16 of all magazine distributions in the U.S. So Sports Illustrated, which is a sporting magazine, sells 2 million copies a week. The swimsuit edition sells 5 million. And ask yourself, since when is wearing a swimsuit a sport? Magazines like Redbook and Mademoiselle sell sex as well, even though it may be more on the PG or the just slightly R-rated side as compared to Cosmopolitan and Maxim. As a socializing agent for our young people, magazines still have a strong effect. Studies found, and I admit these are a little bit dated, but you can use them as a reference point for the formation of thoughts for the 30 to 40-year-old crowd, and these people are now perpetuating the message that you're internalizing. The studies found that 75% of girls aged 12 to 14 read at least one magazine a month, and even magazines geared to younger readers like YM reference sexual attractiveness. Messages are heavily embedded in our music too. One study found that college students spend about 36 hours a month listening to music. That's practically a full work week a month. So music videos too contain sexual imagery. The language in the music and the visuals that are depicted in the music videos can be very explicit. And from a standpoint of social change, each new generation of artists seems to try to push the boundaries more than the former generation. Madonna was considered scandalous in her day, and then artists like Eminem and Kid Rock, they push things even further, which then raises the bar for artists like Beyonce and Nicki Minaj. One of our most recent phenomenon is the creation of what's known as dirty rap or sex rap, which is trying to push the boundaries now even more. And even though the radio won't always play the more explicit versions, teens still have access to them with their iTunes and Spotify accounts. Country music tends to be a little bit tamer and more conservative, but at the same time it's just as guilty for perpetuating stereotypes, and it sells sex too. A great example was the cover on Faith Hill's album Breathe, and that was back around the late 90s or the turn of the millennium. It depicted her presumably naked, wrapped in a bedsheet. So then we have to consider the question, what effect, if any, does listening to this kind of music create? While we can never fully separate causation and correlation, we do know that one study found that teens who listened to more music videos were generally more sexually permissive than teens who did not. And then when we consider the radio, we have to realize that radio delivers more than just music. While I have tremendous respect for Howard Stern's intellect, and I realize when he's talking about something other than sex that one would be impressed with his intelligence, at the same time he's done a terrible disservice to women with his incessant sexist bashing on the Howard Stern Show. Stern boasts the title of the most fined radio host, having had over $2.5 million in fines levied against his radio show licensees over the past years. And truthfully, Stern was more into just shocking people. And if you don't know, he published a book in 1996 called Miss America, which features him dressed in drag, and allegedly the first edition shows a photo of him in drag at one of Donald Trump's weddings. So he's mining shock value, and some would argue that is all he's doing, but he does it at the debasement of women, denigrating them. Stern's exploits aside, every major city will have their own version of Stern, a local shock jock that tries to push boundaries through sexual comments. And of course, other than the Federal Communications Commission, what's known as the FCC, there is no regulation, and children are free to listen to these messages. Movies, of course, are also loaded with sexual content. A large majority of movies are rated R, and some consumers won't even consider going to a G or a PG movie, as it is seen as not adult enough in content. Oftentimes, the sex scene is not even part of the story plot, and they are included just for gratuitous reasons, to get the R rating and to scintillate and titillate the audience. If you're watching for these types of scenes, you'll see them most often within the first 10 to 15 minutes of the movie. And most adolescents have seen R-rated movies. In fact, most teens will see one by the time they are 13 years old. Hollywood norms are the gatekeepers to what we see on both TV and in the movies. The boundaries here have moved over time. Hollywood didn't even show women's breasts in the 1960s. One of the biggest dilemmas in Hollywood was in the late 1950s when Lucille Ball, who was a megastar in the I Love Lucy show, became pregnant. The producers were caught in a dilemma: either cancel the show, which was a main cash cow for the studio at that time, or have a, and I say this was scandalous at the time, pregnant woman on the show. The solution was to write her pregnancy into the script, and for the first time ever, a pregnant woman was shown on TV. This, of course, pales in comparison to what we see on TV, with everything but nudity now being fair game. And of course, there's also late-night cable, with both soft and pay-for-view hardcore porn also available. Television, too, is prevalent. Parents sometimes try to limit what their children will watch, but when they go to a friend's house, the same precautions are not always in place. Indeed, I wouldn't even allow cable in my house while my boys were growing up, and the end result was that as soon as they could drive they were mobile, they would spend most of their time at their friends' houses. And when I asked my oldest why his friends never came to our house, he said, "Because we don't have cable." So there is that socializing effect of peers, which the family may have a very difficult time enforcing. And we know that 3/4 of teenagers have listed television and friends as their major source of information about sex. And 1/4 of preschoolers and 2/3 of children 8 to the ages of 16 have a TV in their bedrooms. I want to present the idea of the storyteller, and that in many ways that could possibly be the most important role that there is in society. Before broad use of mass media, and that was less than 100 years ago, it was the storyteller that informed the next generation, or shared stories within their own generation. So this could and possibly is the most important role in society from a perspective of all of human history. For thousands of years, all a person knew about the world was what he or she learned from someone that talked to them. The printing press changed that in the 1800s, and we, of course, know too that humans have chronicled their stories on other things like parchment, tablets, buildings, and even cave walls. But for the most part, almost everything a human being knew prior to about 100 years ago, that came in the form of someone talking to them. So there are two roles here that are fundamental to human development, that of the speaker and that of the listener. So what I want you to get out of this is that we are wired to listen and observe, and that the TV has replaced the storyteller. And isn't that really what we're doing while we watch TV? We're being told a story and we're listening. Whether it's the story of the folks on a lost island, or the story of who Donald Trump is going to take on as his apprentice, or who is the biggest loser, or My Remodel from Hell. They're just stories with big production budgets. And we love to hear stories, or we wouldn't be dialing in to the tube instead of, for instance, reading your supplemental articles for this class. And there's lots of sexual content on TV. 2/3 of programs during prime time have had some sort of sexual content with an average of 5.3 scenes per hour. And mostly when it's sexual content, it's talk about sex. 10% of prime time have scenes where sexual intercourse is depicted or strongly implied. And interestingly enough, it appears that the public doesn't want to see married folks having intercourse because scenes about unmarried intercourse tend to outnumber those about married intercourse 5-1. Apparently, married intercourse is just plain boring. And on TV, sex is depicted in all sorts of genres of television. Situational comedies, primetime dramas, daytime television. I don't think there's a Jerry Springer episode that doesn't talk about somebody who's cheating on somebody else. And soap operas. And another interesting point is that safe sex is rarely mentioned. And finally, it's not only the TV shows or the movies that's selling us sex. It's the advertisements that also show us what it is we want and what we want to be like and what to buy so we can achieve that.